This day in history, 13 June. On 13 June 1966, the U.S. Supreme Court hands down its decision in Miranda versus Arizona, establishing the principle that all criminal suspects must be advised of their rights before interrogation. Now consider standard police procedure, which is: you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in the court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford one, one will be appointed to you. Has been heard so many times in television and film dramas that it has become almost a cliche. June 13, 323 BC, the great Alexander dies. Alexander the Great, the young Macedonian military genius who forged an empire stretching from the eastern Mediterranean to India, dies in Babylon, in present-day Iraq, at the age of 33. Born in Macedonia to King Philip II and Queen Olympias, Alexander received a classical education from famed philosopher Aristotle and a military education from his father. At the age of 16, Alexander led his troops into combat and 2 years later commanded a large part of his father's army that won the Battle of Chaeronea and brought Greece under Macedonian rule. In 336 BC, Philip II was assassinated and Alexander ascended to the throne. When the U.S. Postal Service began parcel deliveries in 1913, it wasn't long before some ingenious parents cottoned on to the idea of mailing their children. A 10-month-old baby boy, the child of Mr. and Mrs. Jesse Bish from Batavia, Ohio, was posted for a cost of 15 cents in stamps, though his parents did insure him for $50. In the most famous case, 5-year-old May Pierstroff was mailed via train from her home in Idaho, the stamp stuck to her coat. The practice is not as callous as it first appears. Postmen were trusted local officials whom rural people usually knew personally. May Pierstroff was herself sent with a cousin who was a postal clerk. Nevertheless, the U.S. Postal Service tried to shut the practice down and had to issue a directive that no humans were to be carried in the mail. On June 12th, Nelson Mandela begins 27 years in jail. Born in 1918, Nelson Mandela belonged to a royal family of Xhosa-speaking Thembu tribe in the South African village of Mvezo, where his father was a chief. After he died in 1927, 9-year-old Mandela was adopted by a high-ranking Thembu regent who saw his young ward as a future tribal leader. Their relationship came to an end some years later when Mandela learned that his guardian had arranged a marriage for him. Rather than go through with it, he fled to Johannesburg and took a job as a night watchman. It was a sad turn of events for a man who had been the first in his family to receive a formal education. Mandela, then known by his birth name Rolihlahla, had completed his primary education at a missionary school. At the time, it was common practice for teachers to give African student English name. So when he was 7 years old, Rolihlahla became Nelson. In later years, as a sign of respect, many people referred him as Madiba, his Xhosa clan name. Mandela may have needed the night watchman job to earn money, but he moved on to study law at Johannesburg's University of Witwatersrand and qualified as a lawyer in 1942 at the age of 24. 2 years later, disturbed by racial prejudice that had become rife in South Africa, he joined the African National Congress (ANC), a political group seeking equal rights for black people. It faced a monumental challenge in its struggle after 1948 election victory of Afrikaner-dominated National Party, which introduced its formal system of racial classification and segregation, apartheid, a separate development. While maintaining white minority rule, apartheid meant that by law, basic rights of non-whites were heavily restricted. Not only were they unable to serve in government, they weren't even allowed to live in same areas as whites, go to the same school. They could not share a table in a restaurant with whites, nor sit next to them on the train or a bus. In retaliation, the ANC launched its campaign for defiance of unjust laws and called for boycotts, strikes, civil disobedience, and other non-violent protests. Mandela traveled across the country to organize protests. His activities became too much for authorities, so in 1956 he was arrested on a trumped-up charge of treason. Mandela was held at a prison in Johannesburg for 5 years before the charge was dropped and he was released. The ANC, which became a banned organization while Mandela was behind bars, had always advocated peaceful protest. But after he came out of jail, Mandela and other ANC leaders decided to set up a secret military group called Umkhonto we Sizwe, or Spear of the Nation. It was a fateful decision. In 1963, the police found weapons and documents belonging to a secret group, which led to the arrest of Mandela and 7 others. They were charged with plotting to overthrow the government, and each was sentenced to a life imprisonment. Mandela would spend the next 27 years in jail, initially on Robben Island, 7 miles off the coast of Cape Town. After 18 years, he was transferred to the first of 2 inland prisons. Whilst behind the bars, he was quoted as saying, "I have cherished the idea of democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve, but if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die." Over the years, he became one of the world's most famous prisoners, and there were international campaigns to free Nelson Mandela. At the same time, South Africa came under increasing pressure to abolish the apartheid system. By mid-1980s, it found itself among the world's pariah states, the subject of economic, sporting, the cultural boycotts that affected almost every aspect of life. It all came to the head in 1989 when President P.W. Botha suffered a stroke. The reforming FWD clerk, who had held secret talk with Mandela in his cell, took his place, first as a party leader and later as a president. Knowing that apartheid system was leading to both economic and political bankruptcy, de Klerk was bent on reform. As a president, he released all important political prisoners in 1990, including Mandela, and lifted the ban on the ANC. His government then began systematically to dismantle apartheid. Mandela became president of ANC in 1991 and worked with de Klerk in bringing an end to apartheid while introducing equal rights to all. They shared the Nobel Peace Prize in 1993 for their work for the peaceful termination of apartheid regime and for laying the foundation of new democratic South Africa. The country's first all-race elections, held in April 1994, saw the ANC win a majority of seats in new National Assembly. Mandela became South Africa's first black president, with de Klerk as his deputy in the government of national unity. An iconic figure around the world symbolizing peace, equality and determination, Mandela retired from politics in 1999 and set out to live a quiet life with his third wife, Graça. He said, "I have retired, but if there is anything that would kill me, it is to wake up in the morning not knowing what to do." A lung infection brought his days to an end, and he died in December 2013 at the age of 95. The world mourned his loss.